Hello, this is Pastor Manning, welcoming you to the Beacon of Hope podcast, beginning a new series on a fellow in the Old Testament by the name of Mordecai. Many of you will know him from the book of Esther. For some of you, maybe introduction to him. But there are 8 different things I'm going to bring you over a series of 8 podcasts dealing with a great man unaffected by greatness. Let me read to you the scripture that allows us to know he did become a great man. And although I will not go into detail on it today, the scripture also shows us that he was unaffected by that greatness. And that's a very rare thing for a man to become great in his accomplishments or his reputation and not be affected by that, usually in a very adverse way. Esther chapter 10 is only a 3-verse chapter. I read it to you now. This is at the end of what was recorded about Mordecai's life, the last thing that the Bible talks about regarding him. It says, "And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed." And I'm not to go into detail, but in his greatness, the common people of his people, the Jewish people, still accepted, revered, and loved him. That's a very, very unusual thing. Got to thinking about what went into the ingredients of the greatness of a man who was unaffected by his greatness. And I believe that one of the first things we saw was in the introduction of Mordecai, and consequently, Esther. And that's back in Esther chapter 2, and I'll read the passage to you here. It says, "Now in Shushan the palace, there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he, Mordecai, brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maiden was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter." Now, you have Mordecai here, and his name means little man, is one of the meaning of it. And he has a cousin, actually, by the name of Hadassah, which is her given Jewish name. Hadassah means myrtle. It's the myrtle tree, which is a tree that is held of good value and is to be desired. And this cousin of his was younger than him, obviously, and young enough that when her mother and father were both dead, that Mordecai took her into his family and raised her like a daughter. We see part of his greatness is his capacity to love. Esther, by the way, the name Esther means star. Esther was, or Hadassah Esther, is who we will go by, since the Bible calls her that from that point forward. Esther received love from him just as if she had been his own child. And so much so, if you read the book of Esther, which does not take a long time to read and certainly is profitable, but Esther had great reverence for Mordecai, great respect. And even when she became queen, she had great respect for his influence, his advice, his direction in her life. She was obedient to him even as an adult lady, not in a subservient, slavish, or fearful sort of way, but in a way that was born because of respect and reverence for his wisdom. He loved her as his own daughter. The greatness of a man who was not affected by greatness, he had great capacity to love, to care. And he sought what was good for her. He brought her up I take that to mean there were no failings or neglect. Gave her what she needed, affectionate-wise, direction-wise, her material goods. He brought her up. He didn't leave her behind in what was going on. And of course, Esther had been called in, was being considered as one of the young maidens in the kingdom to potentially be the queen to King Ahasuerus, who was a massively powerful king in his time and period. And Esther was taken to a place where these maidens were taken if they were being considered to be the queen. I'm going to read just a few more verses to you, and it'll show you Mordecai's solicitude towards Esther. That's the word I would choose to use. He had a solicitude towards Esther. He did not have to take her and raise her the way he did. She was a daughter, not a son. And there was a difference in the viewing of those things. Not that daughters were held in contempt, but she did not have the potential to bring to him or his part of the family wealth or lands or anything like that. And so anyway, he had been gracious to her. And it says, verse 8, beginning again in Esther 2, it says, "So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. And he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not showed her people, nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it." In other words, she didn't tell anybody she was Jewish. Mordecai understood the political climate. He was a man of some reputation already. He was advancing, and he understood that that could be dangerous for Esther, that it could be a hindrance to her. And he told her, he said, "Don't tell them you're Jewish." And you know what she did? She listened to him. She actually obeyed him. And by the way, that was vital, not only for her, but for her people later. But then here's the verse. It says, "And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should come of her." He could not go into the court of the women, but the court of the women's house, but he apparently had contacts who could go in. He apparently had people who would come out and tell him. Every single day, Mordecai made sure of how she was doing, made sure of what was going on with her. He continued in his love, his solicitude for her. It didn't matter how he could be affected by things. He was a great man who we will find was unaffected by greatness. And part of the reason why he had a great capacity to love and to care for somebody and to care for others' needs. Let me end this brief podcast with this statement. There is no hope in anyone of true greatness if they do not have the capacity to think of others besides themselves and to care for the needs of others besides themselves. If a person's focus is always on how they are affected, how they are blessed, how someone else does or does not treat them, that person will be greatly diminished and cannot have true greatness. And by the way, that self-centeredness, if they do obtain a great position, personal, true biblical greatness will not go with it. And that elevation of position will become detrimental, maybe even destructive to that person. Think on these things, and may you have a great and blessed day.